Christian parenting.
There is no Christian that didn't come into the family of God but through spiritual adoption.
Right.
So we understand what it means to cry out, Abba, Father, because we have been adopted. We have been given the spirit of adoption. And so cute pictures and sad stories may be good reasons, but the great reason is, that you and I were chosen, and chosen people choose people.
Hey families, welcome back to the Call to Love podcast, where each week, we dive into the practical, the clinical, and always most importantly, the biblical aspects of the adoption and foster care callings. Today, we are going to be talking about building your family the way God builds his. Joining me for this conversation is Pastor Andrew Hopper to share his family story and his ministry, the work that the Lord has called him to. I am really excited to hear from your perspective. Pastor Andrew, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you guys. Really excited to be on today.
Absolutely. I would love for our listeners just to get to know you. Have a very unique perspective you are shepherding a flock essentially in really advocating for adoption and foster ministry, but you yourself have led your family to answer that calling. So let's just allow our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. Tell us about your family and God's call on your life and your heart towards adoption.
Yeah, me and my wife, we've been married for 20 years, and even in our engagement, we talked about adoption. I feel like God just kind of had independently put that in our heart and in our life. We, fast forward all these years later, we end up with 4 awesome kids. 3 of them came because of biology. 1 of them has come because of theology. And, we are the proud adoptive parents of we didn't set out to do this, but we ended up adopting a child with pretty severe special needs. She has Down syndrome, which I didn't know this before, but that's a pretty wide spectrum of where people can be when they have Downs. And so, right now in her development, she's kind of on the lower end of functionality with Down syndrome, but she's an absolute light, and she is kind of become, in a lot of ways, the face of our church's adoption ministry called Chosen. In 2012, I left an awesome church in the Raleigh-Durham area, Summit Church. I was a campus pastor there, and we planted a brand new church in about an hour and a half down the road in Greensboro, North Carolina, called Mercy Hill. And we've been grinding for 13 years, and the Lord has blessed our ministry. So we're now a multi-site church and a church planting church. But one of the things that, by God's grace, we've become known for in our area is our pretty radical commitment to foster care and adoption. And so in 2020, we set a goal of seeing 200 families from our church either adopt or foster by 2025. And by God's grace, earlier this year, we had our 200th family, and it was cool because they were college kids at Mercy Hill who did our summer project in 2017 that got married, and they ended up, having a vision for adoption even since then, and they ended up being the 200th family. So,
wow.
We're very into these waters, both personally and as we lead the church.
That is incredible. Oh, I want to dive into all of that as we go throughout our conversation today. But take us back to, you said that you and your wife, talked about this as you were establishing your future relationship together and just what your family was going to look like. What did that timing look like for you when God said, okay, now it's time? What did his leading sound like? What were those points of confirmation for you where you're like, okay, this is what God has for our family?
Yeah. So, Our adoption story, really, again, independently, I had done a lot of, from the time I was 12 to 22, I spent some portion of every single summer on Indian reservations in Montana doing different types of work, mission work, and had just developed a huge heart for that community particularly, but really, the thought of seeing so many children that were being raised in broken homes was just such a heartbreak thing for me. My wife spent time in China and in an orphanage situation, and she had spent a summer there, so she had much of the same leaning. So we talked about it some, and then by God's grace, when we landed in seminary, we landed at a church that really preached preached the mission in a lot of phases, and one phase of that mission was adoption. And so we were sort of in an adoption-minded church that really helped us kind of shape that calling. We had some really good friends, a pastor friend of mine named Trevor Atwood, who is in Murfreesboro, Tennessee now, but they had one adopted child, and then we walked through their whole process of adopting their second child as friends. And so that gave us a really up close look. And so we actually had committed to adopt before we even had biological children. We thought that's what the plan that God had for us. And so we looked at an agency, but man, I was in school, and the private agency in Raleigh said you need to have one parent stay home. And I was trying to get through seminary. We got licensed to foster, never got a placement. And so, in terms of foster to adopt. So by the time our first biological child came along, we had just kind of tabled it. We still felt like God was calling us to this, but we felt like his timing was, we had freedom in his timing. And so we were just so after our third child was born, we sort of revisited it again. And it was cool because of how God brought it all back around. That first adoption agency that we had looked at, almost 10 years before was the one that we ended up going with. In the end, because my wife was able to was already by that time staying home with our kids. And so and it was a quick we got all licensed and all that, and then we thought we were going to sit on the list for years, and then it was like 2 months and we had a child. So
wow,
yeah, it was quick.
That's pretty incredible. And all the Call to Love audience is like, no fair, because I know there's a lot that's been waited for a long time.
I'm sure we have stories like that in our church of people waiting for years. So yes. It was a small agency, and I don't remember doing this, but I think, and you guys know, obviously, this audience, like, you kind of go through that list of everything that you're going to say yes or no to.
Yeah.
And some kind of way, apparently, we had put either yes or maybe on Down syndrome.
Okay.
I don't remember doing that, but maybe the Lord's hand was just
the Lord checked that box for you.
Yeah, that's right. So we were kind of ushered into the top of the list, I guess you could say.
Okay, that makes sense. So talk us through that when you got that phone call to be matched, and you knew that was a factor. Talk about those conversations between you and your wife and moving forward in that yes.
Yeah, it was so surreal looking back, because we got this call, and the adoption agency, this is funny, this is their words, not my words, okay? So they said, we want to talk to the husband, dad, because moms tend to get really emotional during these times when they call.
That's true.
And I said, well, that's fine. I'm probably going to be just right? As emotional as she is. But it was Summer, it was one of those things where you go into the call expecting to come out just elated, and you come out wrestling.
Okay, yeah.
Because we didn't realize that there was this issue, and I didn't know a lot about Down syndrome. I certainly didn't know that it was a spectrum. One of the things I think people don't realize is most people's conception of Downs is shaped by people that they meet in everyday life, and the fact that you met them as someone working at Target shows you that they're probably on the very high end of functionality. So there's this whole other side that you may never ever meet. So, they were really good. Our adoption agency was really good about don't say yes right now. We want you to take a few days and pray through this and think about it. The way I write in the book, I think that we both came out of that initial meeting already saying yes, but we wanted to honor them. So we had some really good conversations. My dad, this is such a funny sidetrack, but my father, blue collar guy my whole life, and never finished college degree or anything like that. And then later in his life, he actually went back to school after I was out of the house and became a teacher for special needs kids.
That's amazing.
I know, it's like God had something in mind, here for our family, but I know. And he's worked with tons of kids with Down syndrome, and so I was able to call him, and it was funny because I said, well, we're praying about it. And he said, well, what are you praying about? And I was like, well, they talked to us about praying about it. I was like, what do you, and he's like, well, it seems like you asked God to give y'all a child through adoption, and it seems like you've been presented with the opportunity. I'm not sure what there is to pray through.
Wow.
so I was like, man, that's pretty good. So
yeah.
But we had a lot of good conversations, and what became hard though was we were supposed to meet with mom like the next week, and she kind of ghosted everybody and for like a month.
Wow.
And the agency sort of told us, hey, I would be prepared that this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I had kind of an intimate moment with the Lord where I felt like He had given me given me the child's name. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but
Not at all.
um, I felt like God spoke to me. I know people always make a big disclaimer about, well, it wasn't audible or this or that. I felt like God just spoke to me.
Mm.
Um, and it was right in the middle of the wrestling with praying with my wife around these things. And our daughter's name is Faith Ann. And I felt like the Lord, told me her name was Faith. And so even though we didn't see mom for a month, I kind of had I actually didn't tell my wife that whole story because I felt like that would maybe, because I could be wrong or
Sure.
whatever, but I did sort of, as the scripture says, kind of hide it in my heart. And so I sort of had like, I think this is going to work out. And then we did, we got a call and we had our baby girl the next day.
Wow. That is incredible. I really appreciate you sharing that and just being very authentic with us, because as a pastor, there's this expectation of how you're supposed to be like, well, this is how the Lord would have you guide this and how you would respond to
Yeah.
this, and big faith and, easy surrendered yes on the table and all of that. But you still navigated it very much just as a husband and as a dad. And that's really important, I think, for us to see. You said something a few moments ago that I've got to come back to because I love the way you said it. You said you have 3 biological and 1 through theology. I
Yeah.
think that is so profound. So I want to lean into just the theology of adoption, because
Yeah.
in this conversation, especially on the secular side of things, a lot of times adoptive parents can even be vilified of, you're taking kids away from, or the culture of adoption has changed so drastically in what it was in the last 10, 15, 20 years to what it is now. There's a lot of nuance to that. And so as believers and as the Called to Love audience, we go to God's word. And so I want to lean into you as our pastor and our guest today of the theology of adoption and why that's important for us to understand that.
I would love to. And honestly, the book that I have coming out is the sort of the tagline in the book is a little bit of, cute pictures and sad stories are good reasons to adopt, but the problem is you need a great reason.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard.
Yes, it is.
And it's hard for 2 reasons. I mean, like you said, I remember when Amy Coney Barrett was coming up for the Supreme Court, and people were saying things like that. It's adoption is colonialism and all this stuff.
Yep.
And I think Christians just have to have the backbone to say no, it's not, and don't try to explain it further.
Right.
Just say, hey, no, it's not. And then if someone wants to hear why we do it, then we get a chance to really get into the gospel.
That's right.
And I think it's also really hard because it's just tough, man. I mean, you're stepping into, especially with adoption, you're stepping into a story that only blossoms after there's been devastation.
That's right.
I mean, there's never been the miracle of adoption without the absolute heartbreak of a broken family.
That's right.
And so you're just stepping into something that's so hard, and then you have special need. My wife, I mean, no one will ever know what she has laid on the line for Faith Ann.
Mm-hmm.
There's just, and nobody could. I mean, she, when Faith Ann was born the next day, I mean, Anna spent the next 2 months, half the time at our house, every single day. She'd be half a day at our house, half a day in the hospital. The hospital's an hour and a half away.
Oh my.
And so she's homeschooling our kids and she's still at the hospital. I mean, but she didn't let one day go by that Faith Ann wasn't held or sang to. So there's just a lot of hard that comes with it. So yes, we need a great reason. I love the line I get from Tony Merida. I butcher the actual quote, but that the idea is very much that we don't adopt because of a lack of something in biology. It's because of the fullness of something in theology. And I think people a lot of times assume the only reason you would adopt is if you can't have biological children, which is a great reason to adopt. It's in the mix. I think the desire for children and family is a godly desire, and that's fine. But like at our church, I mean, most of the people that adopt already have a biological kids, or they end up having them later, just statistically from our church. And I read, the Barna Group says, the Christian families are more than twice as likely to adopt than a non-Christian family, and so. Yes. There's some kind of theological impulse that's stronger than biology, and I would just say it very simply. We can go as deep as you want, but in the book, I just say very simply that there is no Christian that didn't come into the family of God, but through spiritual adoption.
Right.
So we understand what it means to cry out, Abba, Father, because we have been adopted. We have been given the spirit of adoption. And so cute pictures and sad stories may be good reasons, but the great reason is, that you and I were chosen, and chosen people choose people, and adopted
That's
people adopt people.
good.
So,
That's good.
to me, that's where I would look at it and I would say that outside of marriage, adoption is the single greatest metaphor for what God has done in our life
Yeah.
on the planet.
Yeah.
And we get a chance to put the gospel on display, whenever we step into adoption. There's almost no aspect of it that we can't say, yeah, it did cost me a lot, but you know what? It cost God more. This was hard on the siblings that came in because of because of the disruption. But you know what, man, like how many people in the church labored with me to look over my disruptions whenever I came into the family? I mean, the whole thing drips with gospel imagery.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's fantastic. And I love that perspective. And I love that you say we can just very simply put it like, whatever the enemy's combating this calling with, we can just very confidently say, no, it's not. Like, this is God's heart. This is God's word. This is our response out of a place of gratitude and obedience when the Lord places that on our heart specifically. And so I love that you're leading in this way. And I have to ask about, just this movement that you felt led by the Lord to create in your own church body as you're leading them. What did that look like in terms of you? Because let me ask it this way. There's been a huge push over the last 20 years of Christians should adopt. And there's been a lot of negative experiences on the other side of that because people kind of came in starry-eyed, uninformed, certainly not trauma-informed. And I can point to the host of today's show in that as well. And then you get on the other side of it, you experience the reality of the hard, the brokenness that you're stepping into, the spiritual warfare aspect of it, all of the things. And some families who experienced an extra extent of brokenness, couples divorced because of high needs, special needs kids, or children coming internationally who had more needs than they expected. And so it broke apart their family as a result. So there's all those things that I'm diving into, Pastor Andrew.
Right.
But yet God's word is clear. We are called to respond, to care for the widow and the orphan. And specifically, we're talking about the orphan, those who are in need of forever families. And so how do you lead a congregation in a way to say, we're called to respond to this, but make sure you're really called to answer that adoption component? What did that look like for you as you were leading your congregation in this?
Well, we have not done it perfectly, and we will continue to adjust. I think that the greater movement in evangelicalism has always got to do that. There's such a pendulum swing culture that we live in terms of the church. In the U.S. and the evangelical church, we get hyped on stuff and then it's painful and then we're not hyped on it anymore.
Yeah.
And then it goes dormant and so we get hyped on it again. I think with the imagery of adoption so integrally connected in the gospel, I think with the James 1:27 that this is pure religion, is to be looking in on the orphan. Like I think with those type of components that we don't have the opportunity just because it got hard or we weren't informed to take our ball and go home as a movement.
Yeah.
And so I think we've just got to continue to get better at, we call it holding the rope at Mercy Hill. It's kind of the William Carey, William Carey, Andrew Fuller kind of idea. I'll go down in the pit and be the missionary. If I'll dangle on one end, if you'll hold the rope and support. And so we have a ministry around rope holding, and we want to, this next year as we reset goals around what we want to do, we need that ministry to become much more robust because it is hard. I think personally, it's a little tough for me with the whole conversation of, man, we went in starry-eyed, only because I think as a pastor, I'm like, man, I can't think of something that the enemy would hate more than Christian adoption.
Yeah.
If you think about the number one environment for the transfer of faith worldwide, full stop, the home.
Yes.
And so if we can break the home apart, of course we can disrupt the transfer of faith.
That's
And then
right.
you have a lot of these kids that are coming out of either regions around the world, or they're coming out of foster situations where that transfer of faith wasn't going to happen to begin with, and now
Yeah.
you're putting them in a Christian home. I think maybe for me, like I sort of am like, man, what did we think was going to happen, you know?
That's right.
But the reality is that everybody's not a pastor. They're not thinking about it through that lens. I mean, I felt like when Ann and I stepped in, we actually had a good view of like, this is going to be hard, and it was still 10x that. So if people don't have that lens, you know, I'll give you one kind of, maybe it's analogous. You know, the first few times we planted a church, I felt like we did not on the front end prepare people for the spiritual war and say, man, this is going to be hard.
Yeah.
There's going to be members of this team that get sick. There's going to be people whose marriages start falling apart. You're going to have anxiety and depression pop up. There's going to be people that start believing lies theologically. Like, the enemy is going to throw stuff at you. And I think we needed to do a better job of preparing them. But I will say this, even though we are doing a better job of preparing them now, it still ain't any easier.
Yes.
And so I think that that's a good lesson for us thinking about adoption. I do want us to get better, the trauma-informed stuff. I mean, I understand. But at the same time, it's going to be what it is.
You're
It's
right.
a spiritual fight.
Yes. Hey families, Summer here. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I wanted to make sure that you have subscribed. By subscribing to the Call to Love podcast, that means you will get notified with every new episode each week, and it helps me to know that you are here and a part of the Call to Love community. You can also leave my podcast a review and rate it, which helps others to find the show. This podcast is growing thanks to you, and we hope to continue reaching families who are looking for resources as they live out their own call to love. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, I agree with that, and I think we do need to prioritize that, and that's one of the reasons why I do this show, Pastor Andrew, because I'm not trying to talk people out of what God's calling them to do, but I want to equip them for the battle that they're stepping into. And we have to acknowledge it if we're going to combat against it. And
Yep.
so it's a hard balance that I have to navigate. And let's talk about the blessings, but let's talk about the hard in a constructive way so that we're equipping you. So I think it's good to discuss that and to name that. You know, you mentioned your wife traveling an hour and a half back and forth to the hospital to hold your daughter, and the hard that followed that. Maybe just give us a word of encouragement just from your own experience about staying faithful and steadfast in the hard,
Yeah.
understanding that that is coming.
Well, you know, as Elizabeth Elliot said, there is no love without sacrifice. And, you know, one of the ways that I try to express to potentially adoptive interested people, because I've got no problem advocating and trying to cast the net. I think more Christians should adopt than are. Not everybody is called to, and I try to, you know, I think we do a disservice putting pressure on everybody. We don't
Right.
want to do that. But
Yeah.
I do think we need to cast the net, very similar to people going into vocational ministry or going to the mission field. Like, those things are hard. I mean, they are traumatic things. People moving your life to India is a tough deal. I mean, you're going to deal with things for years after that.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's not worth it. And that's what I try to do in terms of the encouragement. Like, you know, I think about Faith Ann, and Faith Ann is she'll be 9 years old in a month.
Oh, wow.
She weighs 35 pounds. She's 9 years old. She's my wife calls her T Tiny. She's dealt with a lot of health issues. We're facing a pretty significant surgery coming up potentially that we're just praying like crazy. God healed her one time. We thought we were going to have a heart surgery, and God healed her. Our church prayed and God healed her.
Wow.
We're praying that he's going to do it again with her neck. She's looking at a spinal fusion, which is not totally uncommon with kids with Downs, but it's pretty uncommon. So we're just facing a lot, and like, you know, she doesn't really talk, and so it's, you know, it's hard to understand her sometimes, and she does sign language, she has some words, but so I have no problem like listing out all these things to say, man, you better be ready. But the way I view it is like, there's a lot of families who never have to deal with any of that, but they also never end up with like Saturday morning snuggles with her in the bed with her mama.
Yeah.
And they also don't really understand what it means to actually see her walk for the first time at 3 or 4 years old. And they don't get to see the first time that she actually carried her own backpack into school. You see, and so the nature of sacrifice, there is no love without sacrifice, but I would say the deepest things come from the most sacrifice.
Mm.
And so, I never want to divorce in people's mind that it's all bad, because that's not true.
Right.
There are deep gems that take a long time to mine. And there's a lot of suffering that is involved in mining to get to them.
That's really good.
But when you get to them, it's something that, to watch, to see your other kids have a compassion and an understanding that most humans, I don't care if they're kids or adults, will never have in their life, no fault of their own, but they just didn't live with it.
Right.
And that's tough. My kids have sacrificed a ton. I talk about it in the book. There is no doubt. For years, my kids got way less attention from mom than they would have normally, because one of them wasn't like the others and needed all of it.
Yeah.
We don't. There's very rarely like a family dinner where everybody's at the table, because one of us, which you can guess who, is always attending to Faith Ann to make sure she's fed, she's changed her diaper, so there's a lot of things that they've sacrificed. At the same time, there's some deep things that you don't get no other way.
Right.
And they have a compassion, they have a love for the Lord, they have an understanding of, I even think, the gospel message of what it means to be family in Christ in a way that you can't get another way.
Yeah.
So there's deep things that come with it as well, and I think that is encouraging.
Yes, I agree with that. And being able to push past what's uncomfortable and understand that the Lord does have blessing on the other side of that obedience for you. It's probably not going to look anything like what you anticipate, or anything curated or even Instagram worthy at times. But you're right.
Yeah.
Through the messy is so much good and so much beautiful. I love the rope analogy that you shared with us just a few moments ago. And I would love to lean into that a little bit more, because we do talk about community and just support in response to that calling. And so what does that look like for you? How are you leading your church in being that support system for these families who've said yes? And how would you encourage our listeners to seek that out, or maybe even create that in their own places of worship?
Absolutely. So we really believe that no one should adopt alone. That's, that is, and I would say that's good advice, even if you're not a Christian.
Yes.
If you're just a family that's not, you need a support system, man, because it's different than bringing a child home biologically. And I know, so, I think about, so our church, that we start this way. So in 2020, in God's providence, the week before the world shut down for COVID, our church gave a special offering of $250,000 to be our adoptive family's first partner.
Wow.
So when our adoptive families come, when they basically, what happens is, once they've cleared every hurdle and they set up their maybe it's their LifeSong account, I don't know, it's one of the, when they set up their account, we're the first one, our church is the first ones to put money in, and it's significant. It might be like, I can't remember what it is, 20% of their adoption, 25% of their adoption, something like that.
Wow.
And so but here's what we say you have to be in a group. If you're going to get that money, if we're going to put that investment in you've got to be in a group, because if you're not in a group, that's showing us right away, man, that you're trying to do this alone, and it's not going to work alone.
Right.
So I think that we've had, just candidly, I told you, we've got a lot to learn in this, and we're going to continue to do so. I think that the arc of our story is 5 years ago, a lot of people all at once, because we cast the vision, jumped into foster care and adoption, and they sort of got hit in the mouth.
Okay.
It was a little starry-eyed, like you're saying, and all of a sudden we scrambled a little bit, and we said, man, I don't know that the community group is going to be the most sufficient thing for these families.
Okay.
And so we created this ministry called Rope Holders, and rope holders are supposed to be people who kind of get in your corner, and they line up and they say, man, what can I do to help? We're going to pray for you. Do you need rides? Do you need meals? Do you need, what do you need? And people jumped in, they signed up to help, all that kind of stuff. What we have found over the last couple of years, though, is that families that are in groups, it's it's like, hey man, I've got these people that I'm in group with that I have really good relationships with, and then I have this rope holder who really wants to serve, and they're awesome, but I don't really know them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's kind of like a little bit of a swung back where it's like, okay, people are now kind of or almost organically taking care of each other in groups again. So we're trying to figure that out, because I feel like there needs to be a little bit of a hybrid where it's like, if someone is going to adopt or foster, that is their family's decision, but it groups it it affects their church family, which is most visibly expressed tangibly in that group.
Sure.
So the group has got to be a little bit like, yeah, we see this, we know we're all sort of jumping in a little bit, and then, but I also think there is a place for rope holders, to come in and be partnered up, and we're just still trying to work through exactly what that looks like. I mean, we've had rope holding ministry where people will, man, we're gonna make sure you got a car seat. We're gonna make sure okay, a new foster placement means we're bringing stuff to the house. We're gonna do meals. We're gonna it's very tangible things like that.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's fantastic. And the more you can welcome into your circle of support, the better, certainly. And God is so good and faithful to bring people of different giftings and margin in their lives who can commit more time to do one thing or the other. And so I'm a huge advocate for seeking that out and for churches to establish these types of
Absolutely.
ministries. That's so, so good. I love that you're leading by that example. I want to get into you sharing just a little bit more. The book is called Chosen: Building Your Family the Way God Builds His. And this has come as an overflow of your experience and the heart that the Lord has given you just for this particular ministry. Pastor Andrew, share with us a little bit just about the book, and then I would love for you to close us out in conversation by telling us personally, for you and your wife, just the biggest way that the Lord has changed you as a result of saying yes to this calling.
Yeah, so thanks for asking me about the book. Yeah, so our book is coming out in January 2026, and it is sort of an overflow, I think, of a convergence maybe of three thoughts. So one is, I am an adoptive father of a special needs child, and that changes every single thing about our family dynamic.
Right.
And so there's so the book is written from the lens of someone, I think, who knows, and I am the one who wrote the book, but man, my wife is very integral in the book. So that's kind of one thought stream. Another thought stream is just our church. There's a lot of simple stories. I mean, one paragraph type of things from people that are real people who have real names. They're not named in the book, but they're real people with real names, with real stories, of examples of things that are being talked about in the book. That's another element of it. But the third and probably primary kind of element is the book is a theological study of the greatest reason to step into the adoption and foster care waters of ministry. And so we do a lot of work around that, man. We talk about the kindness of a king, and we talk about Mephibosheth, and talk about what it means to be totally, just absolutely hopeless, and then to have someone rescue you. And then we apply that to adoption. We talk about, the book talks about our gifting. So every Christian is called to make a huge impact, with their life. Ephesians 2:10 tells us that there are works that God has preordained. I think theologically that those things really match up with Romans 12, like how we are wired, yes, passions, yes, but also literally spiritually gifted. And not everybody's called to adopt, but for some, the Ephesians 2:10 calling in your life is maybe an adoption.
Yeah.
We talk about the mission of adoption, where we think about just how, yes, when you bring a child in, they're a mission field, but your life begins to be a question asking type life, meaning like unbelievers look in and they just say, why?
Yes.
Why would you do? And it's an open door for ministry. So there is a lot of theology in the book. I try very hard to popcorn a lot of stories and things from Faith Ann's life, from our experience in as well, and from our church as well. So it's a short read. You read it in 3 hours, probably 3 or 4 hours. It sets up very well for community groups. That was in my mind the whole time we're reading it, is, could this be easily adapted into a 7 or 8 week, where at the end of the chapter there's 3 or 4 questions where you could actually just, without without needing any other guide. Just, hey, we're going to read a chapter and do the questions and meet and talk about it. And it lays well for that. So we're really excited about the project, and our church is really excited. It's kind of converging on, we're resetting a vision for 2030, in January 2026, and the book's coming out then too. And I wish I could tell you I was smart enough that I knew on the front end of this and all that would kind of like
Right.
happen at the same time, but it's not. That's just the way the Lord has kind of lined it up. So we really believe God's going to do some big things through that.
That's so exciting. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Listeners, I will have the link in today's show notes. Pastor Andrew, close us out with how adoption has changed you the most personally.
I mentioned it earlier, but I do think that my wife and I both, have learned to trust that the Lord can really restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And what I mean by that is, there are real, tangible things that our other children have walked through because of me and my wife's decision to adopt a special needs child.
Right.
And, I don't know if anybody else on your podcast struggles with this. I bet you if they're adoptive parents, they will. You want to sort of control everything.
Absolutely.
And you want to have that, and you feel like you got it together, and you feel like, man, we can knock this out, and we can just do. And, you get in a situation with a child like Faith Ann, and I know not everybody, not everybody's going to adopt a special needs child. But, the one thing about Faith Ann is a lot of these trauma things are things that she may never have full awareness around.
Right.
And so there are other people that are dealing with things that you're dealing with a typically developing child, but may have very serious emotional issues and that kind of thing too. So
yeah, my
point is that I feel like Anna and I have learned that the very bottom of adoption is faith. It's, you got to trust that God is going to take care of things that you can't control.
Yes.
With your children, my daughter was 8 years old. Hattie Jo was 8 years old. And things like this would happen. I wasn't home. Faith Ann's G-tube comes out. You only have a certain amount of time to get that thing back in.
Yeah.
It's an emergency. Mom, she's there. She's the other set of hands. And she's 8 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, at that moment, you're just like, we just got to go through this. We just have to do it as a family.
Right.
And then you step back and you think, how does that affect someone when they're 20? That they walk through that. And I think in that moment you have an opportunity to just say, I don't really know. And there may be some practical things that need to be done when she's 20 or whatever, or now. But it's like, ultimately, we're just trusting that the Lord can, do his judo fighter thing and turn the evil of the world against itself and produce good.
Right.
And that some kind of way he's going to build character in all these other kids, even though they didn't get as much of mom and they went through some crazy times.
Yeah.
But that's a deep sort of trust thing, because it's like Hebrews 11 says, man, that is stuff that you don't see. It's got to be the evidence of things not seen.
Right.
And so I would say that's one of the things the Lord's taught us the most through our Faith Ann story.
That is beautiful. My goodness. So much more that I know that you could share with us, but thank you so much just for sharing your story with us and the way that you're leading your congregation, and by producing this book. What a fantastic resource. Again, listeners, I'll have the link in today's show notes. And if you have any questions as a follow-up for today's conversation, maybe something that Pastor Andrew said that you're like, I want to know more about that, or want to lean more into that, there's an email address in the show notes as well where you can reach out to me directly, and we will follow up on that as well. So Pastor Andrew, thank you so much for just sharing all of your wisdom that the Lord has given you through all of this. And I just want to say corporately, as a Call to Love audience, let's pray over Pastor Andrew and specifically his sweet daughter as you have this upcoming surgery and just navigating her journey, praying strength over you and your wife as you love her so well through that. So I'm committing for our audience that we will do that. We are a praying community, and we are grateful for examples of obedience like yours. So thank you so much for being my guest today.
That is incredibly encouraging. I really appreciate that. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.